Okay, well, good afternoon. We'll call the meeting to order. This is the special session for September 9th, 2020 of the Marion City Council, along with Linn County Board of Supervisors and other cities in Linn County. We'll begin by taking roll call of the Marion City Council to establish whether we have a quorum.
Mr. Harper?
Here.
Ms. Atkins?
Here.
Mr. Jensen?
Here.
Mayor Abu Osley?
Here.
Mr. Brandt?
Here.
Ms. Gedalia?
Here.
Mr. Sterned?
Here.
Okay. All right, and then I will ask the city clerk to establish which other cities are participating today.
So I'll run through the Linn County cities, and if there's a representative present, if you can just say that you have people listening in. Springville, Alburnett, Fairfax,
Attorney Frieden.
Mount Vernon, Coggin, Robbins, Palo,
Mayor Eric Van Kerkhove.
Hiawatha,
Yes, Kim Downs, Amy Wickendall, and Dick Olson, both are council members, and then Mayor Bennett will be arriving shortly.
Lisbon, Walker, Center Point, Central City,
Mayor Adam Griggs.
Ely,
Mayor L.D. Miller.
Prairieburg, Walford, the Linn County Board of Supervisors.
Ben Rogers is here with Their Engage, and I believe Supervisor Olson will be joining separately if he's not already on.
I believe that's everyone.
Okay, thank you. Thank you everyone for joining us. I will ask our city manager to kick off the discussion.
Thank you, Mayor, and thanks everybody who was able to attend today. So I think we all know why we're here, especially for those of us in the metro area with the city of Cedar Rapids moving forward with issuing a public mask mandate. It really raised the question about what the rest of Linn County would consider, whether it was the communities or the county itself, as far as whether or not we would want to move forward with something similar, either individually or together as a block. And in looking at some of the legal options, we did a little bit of a pre-meeting with some of the legal counsel from the metro area communities and determined that if we were going to move forward, that the best path to do that would potentially be to do a proclamation that would be adopted by the different governmental entities. There are a couple of different ways that it can be done, but it seemed like that would be the one that would be the most appropriate one to move forward. From the Marion perspective, much like some of the other things that we run into being part of a metro area, there were some questions raised by this because a lot of times individuals don't know where the city boundaries are and don't know if a business on one side of the street is in Marion or Cedar Rapids. I do realize that that's a little bit of a question of scale because we're the second largest city. We have a lot of intertwined boundaries with Cedar Rapids that look kind of like broken teeth, but that does affect some of the other communities around Cedar Rapids as well. And so wanted to get together a meeting with the rest of the group and really just see where the other communities were on this. I know that enforceability is a concern with some of the direction that's been coming out of Des Moines. To my knowledge, the only other community besides Cedar Rapids that has done a mask requirement in Linn County is Mount Vernon. I did have a chance to visit with Chris over over in Mount Vernon about their experience with that. And their situation is a little bit unique with the presence of the college that is requiring it, their school is requiring it, but he did note that they observed an uptick in public use of masks after the city adopted a mask mandate. The other thing that he noted is that from the enforcement perspective, most of what they have seen has actually been where they might get a call from a business where someone may not want to wear a mask but is required to, and so rather than it being enforced as like a civil citation, the bulk of what they've seen for enforcement is coming in under the trespass statute, where a patron who refuses to comply might be asked to leave and then creates a problem for the business, so the police end up responding to that. I was contacted by one of the mayors in one of the smaller communities that does not have law enforcement, and I know that's one of their concerns, is that for cities like Marion or Hiawatha that have our own police departments, that picture does look different than communities that may have a contract or may depend on Linn County for enforcement. Also realize that Linn County is in a little bit of a different situation legally by virtue of having the Board of Supervisors and being incorporated as a different type of local government, that their legal options look different than the ones that we have. So wanted to see if there was a common opinion amongst the communities in the county and Linn County itself about how we should move forward, if at all, with doing something to match up with what the largest community in the county has already done.
Anyone have any
This is Mayor Miller with the City of Ely. And our council just recently enforced mask requirements within city buildings. But we did not go as far as to pass it citywide. A couple of reasons that we did not pass it was our city attorney actually advised against a citywide one. Thought it opened us up for more potential legal battles that the council decided we didn't want to fight. And then also, somebody else must have called in, but our concern also is just enforcement. We do not have the staff or the police force to provide enforcement for this. So while we agree with the citywide mandate, council decided to keep it just to the buildings for now.
I can talk if that's okay real quick.
Go ahead.
City of Hiawatha, we've actually been discussing this for about a month now. We had a work session in mid-August and right after the derecho on it. And we kind of explored a couple of different options, both the mandate side of things, and we also wanted to start a public awareness campaign. The thinking behind the PR campaign at the time was, whether or not we'd ever get Governor Reynolds to actually do a mandate. So the idea was to try to raise awareness through, PR and reaching out to our businesses and providing PPE if they needed it. And, kind of setting that boundary on there to try to get people to mask up without it. We did also discuss the possibility of a mandate. I think we had a very thin majority behind it, but we took it off the agenda for last Wednesday because we didn't want to give the necessary opinion that basically we didn't want to send mixed messages ultimately behind it. If we were going to do it, we wanted to kind of all be behind it rather than to say, well, this part of the council supports it, but this council part doesn't. And that I think having a mixed message kind of undermines our central theme for doing the campaign. And so for right now, we kind of tabled that. So we took it off the agenda only to find out mid meeting that Cedar Rapids had passed, done their own ordinance. And personally, I'm in favor of keeping it consistent throughout, like at least the metro area, as far as that's concerned, because you're right, for a lot of parts, crossing boundaries, especially if you're up there within boundaries of Cedar Rapids and Marion, and even some of them on the north-facing businesses on North Center Point Road, there's not always that, that consistency of people know which city they're in, and things like that. So personally, I'm all in favor of consistency and following that lead. But for right now, that's where the council's at, and what we've done to try to, and what we're going to do to try to encourage the, greater use of masks. If I don't know if Kim or Mayor Bennett wants to kind of jump in on any of that, but feel free to add to those comments.
Kim, you want to jump in?
Nope, there we go. All right, had to unmute. Absolutely. Amy, I think Councilmember Amy pretty much summarized our conversations, and we certainly see the value in mass campaign and just it's all about awareness and reminding people. I think the difficulty part is what LD said, was very much the enforcement part of it and having those sometimes difficult conversations. So certainly 100% agree with doing the educational pieces and reminding people that, masks are important. There's value to that. We did have, I think if we would put a vote together today on a mask mandate, with Cedar Rapids putting their mandate in place, with working together with our metro community, I think that we could probably pass the mandate. Bill, where are you at on that?
I'm still getting pushback by 3 of the council members on the idea that, I don't know if you've talked to them lately, but on the idea that, with enforcement and, we've kind of went out and talked to some of the businesses, and we've had pushback with the idea, the restaurants and stuff, they're not going to be able to enforce it in there with the ability, and then construction workers and that kind of stuff. It's just, I think that with Cedar Rapids, I've seen a notice of even going to Casey's, which, they suggest it, but they don't enforce it. But I've seen that an uptick in people wearing masks, which we're all trying to do. You get out to these rural areas and you see none of it. And so, I don't know how we, I think with the PR that we're putting in place is going to help the whole region, is, and I see other PR already on the TV and it's all over social media, that how this can curve the numbers. And, so I'm in favor of that, but I just don't know how we're going to control this. We all know that I like the idea of it all being uniformity amongst the community. I just don't know how we do it.
Just so that everybody knows, the idea that communities can't enforce this springs from an attorney general's opinion, and that's been what the governor has been relying on. There is a majority of city attorneys across the state that fairly vehemently disagree with that opinion, feeling that it's inconsistent with the home rule amendment to the Iowa Constitution, and that cities do have the ability to do that. But I think that's where one of the keys, because I shared those same concerns about enforceability, and Cedar Rapids has taken the tactic of using it as more of a public information campaign, providing PPE for folks. I'm not aware of a city yet that has issued a citation related to this. Dubuque has it listed in their ordinance. They passed it as a law as a scheduled $10 fine, and then it goes to, I think, $15 if it's not paid within 30 days. So they kind of almost treat it like a parking citation or a civil citation. But I think that's where the key, in speaking with Mount Vernon, for them, they haven't approached it as a civil enforcement issue. Again, like many cities, they don't have a huge police department. It's not something they're doing as primary enforcement. So when they have encountered it, it's been being done underneath the trespass statute with the local businesses. Chris was pretty clear that, they're not, the one area that they have encountered some difficulty with is with sporting events with the school. Their school requires them, but schools coming in do not necessarily require it. But he doesn't want their officers going in in to a group of 40 people and attempting to enforce a mask mandate. So they've been doing it primarily on the business community side. Didn't sound like they were just walking down the street and letting people know that there was a mask mandate that they were attempting to enforce. But what Mayor Bennett was talking about, the other communities that have put it in place, that's consistent, that they have seen an increased usage out in the public areas by people. I do realize that the situations are a little different for the communities in the metro area and the standalone communities in the balance of Linn County. Even in the metro area, there's some pretty significant differences. Like if you look at the number of public spaces in Robbins versus the public spaces in Hiawatha or Marion, there's a pretty significant number of spaces out there that would be impacted by having a mask mandate in place. And the purpose of the meeting really wasn't to make a decision on it today, but to come up with a game plan if we were going to move forward for how it would fall together. I know, for example, our city council meeting is next week, and then I believe Robin's city council meeting follows up with that. So it would take time, even if the metro cities wanted to follow Cedar Rapids' lead and have a standard. I know both of my city attorneys have expressed that they would want to change some of the language in the Cedar Rapids proclamation to make it fit our community better. So providing that they were able to have one ready for next week for council review, that would be kind of the next step for us.
I'll jump in here just to add, I appreciate that we're all together on this. I believe Mayor Abu-Asley wanted everyone to get together to have this discussion. And I appreciate the week or so of time that we've had before this meeting, because I've been asking a lot of constituents and people out in the community what their thoughts were. I've spoken with the president of Medco and our Chamber of Commerce to find out what their thoughts were and the impact on potential business. And, the word mandate, the only person I haven't spoken to yet that I really would like to is our police chief, because I really am not for calling something a mandate that we can't enforce. And I'm not for having our police issuing citations for this. Quite honestly, I feel like police across the country right now have enough issues to deal with interactions with the public and perception there. But I would like to see if we can find some other word like a mask advisory, because the whole point is to get more people to wear it. The city of Marion has already been running PSAs to try to alert people to the fact, and we've recommended it. If on the continuum of language there is something between a recommendation and a mandate, I would be for that. Nationally, CDC, this is one of the top ways to slow down the spread. So I think that there's a lot of importance to that statement, as well as the Fed chair, Jay Powell, who says that all Americans should be wearing masks because this can lead to an enormous economic gain for, our economic situation with jobs, et cetera. So just from the constituent and business standpoint and people I've spoken with, I'm on board for doing something more than we're currently doing, but I'm stopping short right now of calling it a mandate because of the enforceability. So the next week or so between our council meeting, if this appears on our agenda, again, speaking with our police chief and what else we might be able to do will be forefront of mind. But I think taking another step and all of us having this discussion and promoting this further is going in the right direction of awareness and making more people feel like they should be wearing masks. I mean, it's the right thing to do. I feel like a jerk if I go somewhere and I forgot my mask in the car and I run back and get it. I feel like it's not for myself. I feel pretty healthy, but it's really for other people. And I think after the derecho, we saw people come together to help strangers, people they didn't know in the community or neighboring communities. And I would hope that people would get on board with something like this, because it's really all about community and helping one another.
Thank you.
And just from Linn County's perspective, I think, first of all, this is a great forum for us to be having this discussion. I wish, in hindsight, that Cedar Rapids kind of signal that they were going to do this, since we had all signed off on a proclamation requesting that the governor grant additional local control to us. But they did it. And so that also is a catalyst for this discussion. This reminds me a lot of the smoking bans that were happening back in the early or mid 2000s, where there were different patchworks of counties that passed a smoking ordinance. And then finally the state had to step in and do a statewide. That is what we're experiencing here now, is for all these different patchworks, and people drive from one boundary that's not marked to another, and they don't know if this is required or mandated. So in terms of our language, instead of mandate, we could use the word mask requirement. Really means the same thing. Maybe it's just not as an affront to someone who may shy away from mandates. And certainly with law enforcement, I think as a community, we would want people to be educated first before they have to interact with law enforcement. So if law enforcement sees someone, maybe they offer them a mask if we have PPE available to distribute instead of a ticket. I would rather do the educational piece than the enforcement, but you know, Iowa now is at 70,000. We're gonna hit 100,000 in probably a matter of months, school's starting. What is going on has to change. And so I know as a board of supervisor, I'd be in favor. Obviously, any action we take is for the rural unincorporated outside of a municipality. And so I think for a lot of citizens, they think if the board of supervisors were to do something, that's the umbrella that brings all the other, you know, it's a one umbrella that covers Cedar Rapids, Marion, Hiawatha, et cetera. No, this is only for rural residents, but we would be in support. I would be in support, and certainly discuss with my colleagues finding out other avenues to explore with our metro leaders. But certainly I think having a mask requirement, when I see it, when I go to a business that says this business requires a mask, everyone's compliant. I think when we leave it up to people now, it's been 6 months, 7 months, we've had experience with this, with people aren't wearing masks, it's because they're choosing not to. And I think that we need to give businesses the ability to say, you know, local officials are determining this. And if I were a bar or restaurant, I would rather have a sign that says you're required to wear a mask than the governor shutting down bars and not allowing you to do your business as usual. So I think as elected officials, it's really incumbent upon us to think of the greater good, and that I know that we're all trying to, but to have this uniformity, Cedar Rapids has done it. So I think to be consistent, I think it would be prudent for all of our jurisdictions to follow suit, so that there isn't ambiguity. It's that we are all saying that masks are required in these public spaces and in at businesses, and really push forward the educational piece rather than enforcement.
As Bernie in Fairfax, our council voted last night not to support a mandate, even though we had one of our staff members pass from the COVID. So it's kind of their opinion, as Ben was just saying, that there's something other than a mandate, some type of education. We do require masks in all of our city buildings, and it's not an option. You can do business through the internet, through the phone, however you want to do it, but if you want to come in the building, you have to have a mask on, period. Other than that, we have no other requirements in the city. We don't have an enforcement arm anyway other than Linn County.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Your Honor, this is Kara Bullerman, City Attorney for Marion.
Hi, Kara.
And I just wanted to also state, following up from what Lon had said, my assistant city attorney in Marion, and we are actually opposite roles in Robbins. We've talked about this a great deal. And for some of the smaller cities that are concerned about enforcement, or even the larger cities that have a police force, we would encourage you to also talk to your city councils and talk to your attorneys about the potential for civil enforcement as well. I know, at least on the business side, I think there would be a pretty good incentive for businesses to enforce if they were at risk for maybe a municipal infraction, which takes that enforcement off of the already busy. And as Council Member Gedalia mentioned, the police force may not be the most popular people in the world right now. It takes maybe being the bad guy off of them a little bit as well. So that's something I would just throw out there, maybe to talk to, each city could talk to their city attorneys about those possibilities as well. Oh, and additionally, I am already working on a sample draft of this language that I intend to circulate among the local city attorneys based on a conversation that we had in the pre-meeting yesterday.
Kara, this is Mayor Miller again, the city of Ely. I'd appreciate if you could circulate that, because I would, from what we're hearing from our city attorney is a little different than I'm hearing in this meeting. So I would like to have the opportunity for them to review the language and make sure that they're comfortable with it as well too. So.
Absolutely. Who's your city attorney? I don't think I have that information.
I can get, well, I get your emails off whatever. It's Pat
Okay.
McConnell.
Okay. I've got his contact info, I believe.
Okay, appreciate it.
Thank you.
I would like just to add a little bit conversation in regards to the business community and not just necessarily those that are open to the public. I think we need to consider putting some type of language in there for those that may not be open to the public per se, only because there are some OSHA requirements and guidelines that businesses need to follow that would not allow them to wear masks or to put a mask mandate in place for a business to follow, such as like car dealerships, their mechanic departments, those types of things that, that is a safety hazard. So there's going to be some situations where that's going to be in place. So it might be helpful to businesses if we move forward with this, that we put some kind of language in there so that they understand that we're taking those things into consideration and make sure that we're not circumventing the safety of the workplace.
Steve Jensen here. A couple of comments I'll add. First of all, I do like the uniformity aspect, especially in the metro area, and I do understand the challenge that the small surrounding communities are going to have as far as enforcement. But I also completely agree with Councilmember Gedalia that we do not want to I'm not interested in putting any further burden on our police force for what they need to be doing. But I talked to a number of people over the past couple of months, and one of the key areas I think about that a mask mandate or requirement is needed is our grocery stores. I applaud stores like Menards that's put a mask mandate in from the very beginning. But there's a lot of people that are avoiding grocery stores or want to avoid it because they're older. That's one of the areas they have to go to on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. So there's a number of stores, if they would have already done it on their own, I think I'd feel less pressure. Go ahead and do something, whether we call it a mask mandate, mask requirement. I think it's more to put pressure on the businesses, especially some of the key ones, make sure they have that requirement of people entering their store. And if the city is making that a requirement, it does take the pressure off of those businesses. And they can say, hey, this is a city requirement, and therefore we have to follow that rule. So from that standpoint, I think it's moving in the right direction. Education is still a key aspect, but I think there's a lot of businesses that might need that little extra push in order to get it done.
Steve, do you think if it's an advisory and it specifically focuses on the businesses and it's an advisory part, one of the elements of it being geared toward businesses, do you think businesses would be more likely to follow it? Or do you think it has to be a mandate?
That I'm not sure. I mean, you'd almost have to take a survey of the businesses. I'd be interested in seeing what our Chamber of Commerce and Metco are getting for feedback. I don't know if they've done any surveys of that. I'm more concerned about a lot of the larger businesses that have a higher foot traffic than I am about a lot of the smaller ones. So there's a number of businesses that have already done it on their own, but there's some larger ones that by now I wish they would have done something. And if they have not, I'm not sure if an advisory would get it done. A mandate certainly would.
The other thing I think about, and it's talked with Lon about it a bit earlier, is once you put the mandate in place, at what point does it get lifted? How is that determined? Because all indications are that, you know, COVID is here to stay.
Just real quick, I wanted to dovetail back on one point before getting into that. I do think the kind of the crux of the situation is ultimately is the language does matter, because I think the problem with an advisory is if people say advisory, it's like best practices but not required, and people will determine that it's optional, which is the problem that we continue to run into, is that we've been telling everybody for months, as has been pointed out, that they need to wear masks, and yet it's because it's not been required, then people still view it as an option where they do or don't have to do it depending on whatever is best for their individual circumstances. So at some point the language has to move to something like, I think, a requirement, if not a mandate, I think, but it has to have that language component that says, yes, you have to do this. We're not asking, we're telling you to do this. In terms of your point, in terms of when this ends, it would have to be, I think, dictated either by a large scale vaccine that's publicly available, or if the numbers in Linn County as a whole fall down to, you know, single digits, maybe double digits. I don't know. You would have to have somebody scientifically say, put something together that says, okay, at this point, it's no longer a public threat. But honestly, even if a small amount of cases can become a very large amount of cases very quickly. So I think ultimately widespread vaccine adoption would have to be the catalyst that ends it.
And to one thing that Kim brought up earlier, when I've seen these put in place, they have applied to public spaces. So what she was talking about, if you've got mechanics in a car dealership, if that area isn't commonly accessible to the public, that would normally not be covered by a requirement that would be put in place. But for businesses that are retail, like Steve is talking about, shopping experiences where you're expected to be open to the public, that does typically apply, but not into the private areas of buildings that are, you know, manufacturers, places like that also come to mind, where the public's not commonly going in and out, and a lot of them already have their own protocols in place for their own COVID policies to provide protection for the workers that are coming in and out. The other thing I would say on the termination of a mandate is that if public health were to determine, say, that that activity had gone down to the point where we were now in phase 3 of their continuum, I mean, at that point you're really lifting the public health emergency. So you'd tie it to either the presence of widespread vaccine or to the ending of the public health emergency.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Just LD once again, Mayor Veely. We tied our mandate within our buildings to when the emergency was going to be lifted by the state. So it's kind of tied into that easier versus exact numbers. So that's just one thought process on that.
Is Pramod Dwivedi with us?
Yes, I am.
I know we can all have access to the information. I'm just, while we're all together here, wondering if it wouldn't be helpful just to recap for us where we are in terms of numbers, in terms of the trends, how it's going in Linn County in particular.
So based on the information, science, and data, we continue to see increase in our numbers. And we have no idea as to how long that's going to continue. Somebody mentioned vaccine. Even though availability of vaccine doesn't mean that entire population would benefit from it, there are certain guidelines that we have to follow. You know, who is the priority candidates in our communities across the United States. So it's really important to make sure that we are doing everything that we can in our power to ensure that we are stopping or reducing the spread of disease. Public health itself, I'm going to be bold, has become a football like soccer, that whoever wants to kick it can kick it without serious understanding of the public health discipline, the important role that it plays in our communities. So unless we have a foolproof way of mitigating our spread, I would suggest, recommend, beg that we follow these guidelines. And I'm very, happy to see some of you really aligning with the science and with the data. But we are not there yet in our community. There are different voices I hear sometimes, but our goal is the same, right? We want to protect the health of our folks in our community. So given the severe nature of this disease, given the numbers that we are seeing in our community, young people are getting infected and they may not show symptoms, but they can infect others who are more vulnerable. So Supervisor Ben Rogers mentioned that, we've been working on this very, very hard for months, to mandate the face covering, but the supreme authority in our state resides with the governor's office, and that has created some problems for us, so we couldn't do it, but I'm glad to see the cities are doing right now. So, my wholehearted request, begging to you all is to, without any, more time, let's do it. Let's have, the mask covering, face covering mandate, and at least we can feel assured that we tried doing it. Is there a specific question I can try to answer?
Anyone have a question for Pramod?
Yeah, I have a question, or maybe a clarification is necessary. What percentage of positive cases are asymptomatic?
Good question, but I don't have answer for that. What proportion of, there are some national data that I've seen, but for our community, I don't have that information, but we can look at that.
Well, I think at some point in time, I saw a number that suggested something about 20 to 25% are asymptomatic. And what I have been thinking about over the last several days, and I've talked to several of our constituents, is the fact that I don't know that people really understand the wearing of a mask isn't to protect them. It is to protect others in the event an individual is asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic and is shedding viruses.
Right on.
And I think that has to be part of a pretty deliberate PR campaign, which has already been mentioned several times, because I just don't think people understand with clarity the mechanism of transmission. Mm-hmm. And I've, from a legal perspective, and I was very sensitized to, I forget who mentioned this, but certainly had an understanding and empathy for the notion of a legal entanglements that this could all bring to us one way or another. But, the funny thing is, I put this in the same category as wearing a seatbelt. In the case of a seatbelt, it's to protect you in the event you have an accident. A mask merely protects others in the event you are, without knowing it, ill and transmitting the disease. So I found the discussion around personal responsibility, and some people have expressed to me, well, I have personal rights. I guess I wonder at what point we understand that personal right doesn't necessarily convey to being able to infect somebody else. So that's just the mix of thoughts that I've had on this, but I thought what was absolutely important is understanding the asymptomatic nature of this.
This is Lisa Epp, and I'm one of the assistant county attorneys in Linn County. I understand that point of view, but I think unless people have been living under a rock, I mean, that message is out there for people who want to hear it or want to believe it. I mean, the people who don't wear the masks are, like you said, the people who believe that they have some sort of right, which of course they don't, to walk around with a mask, just as you don't have a right to walk around without pants. And to be honest, I think a pants are a much more restrictive thing on a person than a small piece of cloth on your face. But the idea that I wish it was that people just didn't understand that it was an idea of respect and of keeping other people safe. I wish that was true. I don't have that much faith. Maybe I'm more cynical.
One question I had for Pramod. I've heard this, and I don't know if it's true, if you could shed light, that the age of mortality in the United States is actually far lower than other nations around the world where the age of mortality was skewing higher. And that's something to do with the kind of the higher rates among younger people who are infected, who do succumb to various causations from COVID. Can you comment on that at all, or do you have any information?
Can you repeat that question again? Sorry.
Yeah, I've heard that basically I want to know, is it true? I've heard that the age of mortality that somebody dies from COVID-19 in the United States is lower than other countries around the world, that it is infecting younger people more regularly, but they're also dying from it more. Is that true, or is that just something I read somewhere?
Based on our data right now, earlier on, we were seeing, more elderly people dying, and our trend continues, more elderly people dying. We haven't not seen, the recent spread is among younger people. We are talking about 18 to 40 years old, because of the reopening of businesses and other things. With regard to the international data, I haven't looked at it specifically what the age range is, but I think there is a belief, at least WHO is saying, that some countries where the younger population is more than older population, they have not seen that kind of rate of death among younger people. For example, my native India, it's exploding. It's now the second largest after the United States. And number of death is lower there. Out of 1.3 billion people, we haven't seen a lot of deaths there. So still, the vulnerable population remains, and we have to do a lot of studies, but it's safe to say that vulnerable population, those who are elderly with underlying health conditions, they need to be cautious. We need to protect them because of the nature of the virus, that how it reacts with those folks. So, age is a pretty big component of this virus. And again, WHO, CDC, and other ministries of health are looking at all these data together and trying to make sense in terms of how to protect our population. But again, going back to our mitigation strategies, what's known, we need to exercise that so that we can at least stop, reduce the spread of the disease.
Okay, thank you.
Well, in the interests of providing a little bit more information as well, I'm looking at Linn County's dashboard, and the largest group of confirmed cases in Linn County has been in the 18 to 40 age range. But I do think it's interesting to note that the 0 to 17 outweighs the number of people over 80 that have been confirmed cases. So it's not necessarily that we're skewing younger, but there definitely is more balance there in the caseload than may be being seen in other areas of the country. But I would suggest that I'm not hearing any communities saying that they're vociferously against having something in place. We had already asked our attorneys to consult with some of the other municipal attorneys and see if they could come up with something that would be workable in the communities. If everybody's interested in that, I think we would just forge ahead with that and then provide a sample proclamation or common language for all the municipalities to review. And then maybe rather than convening something like this with this large of a group, maybe see if we could do a follow-up meeting and get the mayors of the communities together along with the chair of the Board of Supervisors and do a spot check and see where we end up with all of this. Our city council meeting is next week, so if we have something that's ready to go for consideration for our city council, I think we'd probably end up being first, and then Robbins, I think their meeting is the following Monday, and then the rest of the communities kind of follow in a sequence after that. Anybody have any concerns or questions about that course of action?
I think that makes a great deal of sense, Lon, and we're in favor of ideally doing some kind of a group metro / countywide proclamation to just state that here's what you really ought to be doing. This is what we all support. Go out there, be good, common, friendly citizens. However we want to phrase that. And I think Kara's going to be working on some language for that. So I think that's where we're at the moment, and I would suggest we have Kara and whomever else she wishes to be involved with the writing of that language to do so, and then bring it back to us so we can look at something very specific there and move forward from there.
I would just add one more thing, that I think the part that gets confused with residents and everything else is by following these rules, we can continue to have businesses open, events to happen if they're done in the correct fashion. People associate additional mandates as shutting things down. And I think if the part that we're trying to promote is the more the rules are followed, the quicker we get back to normal. And while we can, go ahead.
I agree with you, Eldie, definitely. And I think the worst thing we can do at this point is use the word mandate, because that has all kinds of negative implications. I think what we want to do is say, here are the guidelines. Here's what we want to see happen in our communities as a whole. And let's go from there.
And I think as a group, the better we can make this less political, and the more we can make this about personal health and the health of our residents and the people around us, the better off we are. If we say we're doing this because the governor won't step up and do it for us, you're just going to divide a line immediately.
Yeah.
If we say we're doing this because we're worried about the people around us and we want everybody to be healthy, then by far we're headed in the right direction, in my opinion.
So. I totally agree with that. You know, it is in my mind, the bottom line is it's an issue of home rule, but I don't think we want to go there with the message. So I'm going to put my faith in Kara and her associates to come up with some language that we can take a look at in the next couple days, so that
I guess my question
get our
is
respective councils act upon that.
Yeah, the city of Cedar Rapids pretty much said only when social distancing is not applicable. is that kind of everybody else's general direction on this right now? That masks are only going to be required in public when you cannot social distance? Or I really haven't heard that spoke to yet exactly.
I'd like to see what Kara and her group comes up with, and then we can go from there.
Okay.
But I think that's what the guidelines are, is that when it's not possible to social distance,
Okay.
it's recommended you wear a mask.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's really critical to put in there too, because I think the public also struggles with that. When they see a rules in place for masks, they assume they have to have it on nonstop. And I think it's one thing if you're out in the park versus, like you said, inside of a business. So.
Okay.
Thank you for putting this together. I appreciate this, City of Marion.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Lon.
Thank you all. Anything else? Anyone else have anything to add? No? Okay, Lon, do we have what we need?
Yeah, we'll go ahead and we'll get some draft language prepared and circulated out to the other communities for review for your respective attorneys.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect, thank you.
Good day.
Thanks, Lon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Oh. Okay, as far as the City of Marion goes, the meeting is now adjourned.